Hi, everybody. I know that we'll likely have more folks jumping in, but just in the interest of time and recognizing everybody's schedules and commitments to Zoom these days, wanted to say thank you and go ahead and get started with today's webinar series. Can everybody hear me okay on headphones? Thumbs up. Perfect. All right. Fantastic. Well, I am Meredith Bazemore. I'm the director for UNC Rural, and I want to say welcome to today's Connect, Engage, Transform webinar. This is the third of four, only because we had some scheduling changes with the weather last week. You could blame it on North Carolina spring weather. You never quite know what you're going to get. So we appreciate you all joining us today and being here. And thanks to those of you who've responded about rescheduling the earlier one. I believe we've got some information about the updated time slot for those forthcoming. As UNC-Chapel Hill and communities throughout rural North Carolina have adapted to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, during a year that also showcased ongoing racial injustice and controversial election, we seek to highlight ways that university community partnerships have evolved through this time together. We want to highlight and encourage authentic, effective, and sustainable collaborations for the public good. We hope today's focus on the UNC Rural Initiative will help illustrate some of the ways UNC is forming and strengthening partnerships throughout the state. In particular, today we will talk about some next steps. We want to collect your input and thoughts around how we move forward as an initiative to connect campus and community partnerships and address the inequities that permeate through rural North Carolina. How we can use partnerships and leverage our collective strengths to move towards well-being for all. Some of you may have joined us at last year's conference. It was originally an in-person, and we hoped to repeat that this year. But as we all know, 2020 threw us some great curveballs, and we're still a little bit in that in 2021, although hope is on the horizon with the rollout of a vaccine. And we do hope to, in 2022, see you all in person and off the computer. Last year's conference was also focused on university community partnerships. More than 200 people attended the conference, and we are delighted to receive a ton of great feedback about those experiences and continue this work forward. We've designed this series of webinars to keep the conversations going, stay connected, and check in with how those very same partnerships have adapted to the pandemic. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to introduce Al Richmond today. He's going to be moderating today's session. I will say I was on a call with Al at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, and it was such a welcome start to my week. He came on full of enthusiasm and a big smile and really just helped us start the week off on a great foot. I know yesterday, the others of us on the call were like, man, Al, you're starting us right off on Monday. So we're really lucky to have Al in our work with us, and also as a chance to introduce him today as the moderator for the session. Al works as the Executive Director of Community Campus Partnerships for Health. He is a global thought leader advocating for the increased role of communities in research and public health. In his role as Executive Director of CCPH, Al is advancing the organization's commitment to social justice and health equity. His leadership interest seeks to deepen CCPH's focus in emerging issues impacting our nation, including education, immigration, diversity, and culture. Al is a founding member and past chair of the Community-Based Public Health Caucus and the National Community-Based Organization Network. He helped foster effective partnerships focused on community-identified health concerns and partnerships that integrated local leaders in the decision-making process. Al holds an MSW and provides leadership to multiple academic research partners. And I am really excited to turn it over to Al.
Thank you, Meredith. What a warm introduction. I'm still humbled by the fact that someone finds value in my work and the work of Community Campus Partnerships for Health. So thank you so very much. And welcome to our webinar today on UNC Rural's Reflections and Roads Ahead. And again, I join Meredith in acknowledging that this is not our normal way of conducting our work, and certainly our preference is to be with you in person, but unfortunately we're not able to be together. And so we're going to kind of like develop and build a sense of community virtually. And I welcome you into this space and encourage you to be open and frank with us for the next hour and a half that we're together. just to get a sense of who's in the room, because we have so many people that are here today from all regions of the state. What we'd like for you to do is just to take a moment and actually chat in to the chat box, your name and where you're from, your county. Um, that would help us to get a real good sense of where people are. And some of you are calling in, and we may just actually have you to just give us a shout out. But we're excited to welcome Caroline from Edgecombe County, Michelle from Chatham, others, Diane from Pitt County, Mark from Orange, Trisha, Orange, others, Abby, thank you. We have Halifax County, Rockingham County, Orange is certainly well represented, Wake County, yeah, and Harnett, but grew up in Harnett, yeah. One person says they're genetically from Perquimans and Wilson, so you'll have to tell us about about your roots there in Orange County. I see a couple of people that are on the phone. Dr. Hardy, where are you today?
I'm in Lewisburg today, Franklin County.
Franklin County, welcome. Others on the that have called in and have not identified themselves or would like to let us know where you're from. Well, again, welcome. We anticipate others will join us, and we're looking at others from that represent multiple counties, and includes Wake, Durham, Cumberland, Johnston, and Johnston, the catchment area. So again, welcome, and we're just so glad to have you. Again, I'm Al Richmond. I'm Executive Director of Community Campus Partnerships for Health. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. My home is actually Charlotte, and I've lived in Raleigh now for over 30 years. So this is absolutely my home and I love it. We're about to hear from Meredith Bazemore, who opened today's session, and she will be joined by Giselle Corby-Smith, both of whom are leaders of UNC Rule, and you'll find out more about UNC Rule if it's new to you, which, as many of you may know, is a relatively new office on campus at UNC, and certainly one of our co-sponsors of this webinar series. Meredith Bazemore holds a master's in public administration, and she is the director of UNC Rule, a campus-wide initiative at UNC-Chapel Hill focused on partnerships and engagement between UNC and rural communities across North Carolina. In her role as director of UNC Rule, she works with communities and interdisciplinary colleagues at UNC to connect new partnership opportunities, strengthen existing partnerships, and align efforts which highlight the strengths of North Carolina's rural communities. She is a native North Carolinian, and Meredith has been fortunate to reside in multiple communities across the state, from the mountains to the coast, or as we say, from Murphy to Manteo. Her experiences in each of these areas has given her insight into the unique strengths of our rural communities. Dr. Giselle Corby-Smith is nationally recognized for her scholarly work on the inclusion of disparity populations and research. Her empirical work has focused on the methodological, ethical, and practical issues of research to address health disparities in health. Dr. Corby-Smith is a Keenan Distinguished Professor in the Department of Social Medicine and Medicine at the UNC School of Medicine at Chapel Hill. Giselle has served as the principal investigator of several community-based participatory research projects, and I've had the very good fortune and pleasure to join her in several of those projects. I just want to recognize and acknowledge that Dr. Corby-Smith is recently assumed the role as one of the principal investigators of the Coordinating Data Collection Center, which is part of the Rapid Accelerating Diagnostics for Underserved Populations, which is a national project funded by NIH to support testing initiatives throughout the US and territories. In 2013, she established and became director of the UNC Center for Health Equity Research, or SHARE. You'll hear that acronym several times this afternoon, which is also designed to bring together collaborative multidisciplinary teams of scholars, trainees, and community members to improve North Carolina communities' health. After hearing from Giselle and Meredith, we will then move into breakout rooms, and I'll talk more about those to discuss what we've learned. Giselle and Meredith, welcome, and take it away.
And Dane, I don't know if you can give me access to share my screen, or Caroline. I'm not sure who the host officially is on the call. We'll do that, and we'll set up our slide deck to get started.
I think it's Dane.
Oh, there we go.
Al, thanks so much for that really generous introduction. I know that we're really excited. And, you know, the weather happens the way it happens. And so our third in the series of 4 was supposed to be our 4th in a series of 4 as sort of a wrap up. But here we are today, and thrilled to be able to share with you sort of a little bit of progress. We're assuming not everybody has been part of the sessions that have led up to this, up to today. We know that several of you have been, so we're going to give a little bit of an overview of UNC Rural. We'll talk a little bit about sort of what we've been able to accomplish. And then we want to give you all time, which is what we heard last year and have heard over and over during these sessions, give you time to talk with each other, to get to know each other. And we'll have some focused questions for you as well. Next slide. So this is our structure. We've already shifted it a little bit. As I mentioned, we'll have some opening remarks, a short presentation, and then 2 breakout groups, and we'll ask you to share back out with us. And then wrap up, and we should be wrapping up sometime right around 2:30. Next slide, please. So as Al Bridgman mentioned, UNC Rural was established just in 2019, actually sort of the latter part of 2019, with the goal of aligning, promoting, and supporting community and campus partnerships between UNC, students, faculty, and staff in rural communities across the state of North Carolina. Subsequently, within this last year or year and a half, UNC Rural has been sort of recognized and sort of codified in our Carolina Next, Innovations for the Public Good, under the banner of the strategic priority around the Serve to Benefit Society. And as those of you all that are at UNC or have interacted with UNC, and this was what was told to me over and over again when 20 years ago I came to interview for a position here, that the mission of UNC is to be an institution of and for the people of North Carolina. And that's why I'm here and not some other place. This fidelity and commitment to be of service was so resonant for me 20 years ago, almost to the day. So UNC Rural aims to provide a coordinated and a collaborative space for resources, dialogue, and convening like the ones we're having today and have sort of had over the last several weeks, to share, highlight, and connect across campus around rural engagement partnerships with a focus on the ways that we benefit our community. We engage in campus-wide relationships to better inform partnerships and to leverage the resources, intellectual and other resources across the campus internally, and really to highlight our commitment to partner for community well-being across the state. Next slide. We spent some time early on thinking about why do we want to do this work? Of course, it's in alignment with the mission of UNC, but what we found, each of us in our own way and collectively, is that we see the opportunity to mobilize and leverage the collective strengths that we have both on UNC campus and in rural communities. That mobilization will lead to a thriving North Carolina that's reflective of the unique assets of each community, and that rural communities in North Carolina need to be in the driver's seat, designing their own thriving futures. So we're here as sort of stewards of this work, and really our goal is to create a sustainable long-term impact. I myself have been partnering for over 15 years with collaborators and colleagues, dear friends now, for over 15 years in Eastern North Carolina. And it's only through that long-term impact, a long-term commitment to sustainable impact that I think all parties get find their space in these partnerships. Our goal and our how is to recognize and amplify the strengths of rural North Carolina partners, and there are many, and to facilitate the partnership so that there's equal ownership of that partnership, to be a responsive and reflective at UNC Rural of the community voice in this work, and to find ways to mobilize resources for authentic partnerships through a robust infrastructure for this work. And this is based on a set of values. Yes, you were right, go ahead. And in our strategic planning work, these were the sort of values and anchoring beliefs that we had, that rural communities lead and decide and we follow at UNC, that we will make mistakes. We're human. The last time I checked, we all are, but we'll learn and grow from those mistakes. We know our strengths and communities know their strengths, and we're going to collaborate to connect both for impact. And we'll make it easier for rural communities to work with UNC. Over and over again, we heard that this was a major issue. And we're going to make it easier for UNC to connect with rural communities. We continue to be inspired by the voices, commitment to authentic partnership, and sustained through a robust infrastructure. And then the next slide. I think this is your slide, Meredith. Or is it mine?
I'm happy to take it. It's fine. I was working on, you would think by now taking myself off mute would not require a lot of concentration, but it does still to this day. Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to do with today is to share a little bit about what we've been able to do across 2020. Some of it you heard about earlier when we co-hosted the CET conference. I think for us, one of the successes of that conference, not only was the more than 200 people, but it was 40% of those who attended were from communities across the state, which sort of spoke to the relationships across UNC and across North Carolina. We've been working really hard to increase the awareness of UNC Rural. We have hosted a number of community-based listen, learn, and share webinars. One of the main hopes and goals of those webinars was to find spaces to open dialogue. So we at UNC Rural and UNC could hear what communities were most concerned about in the short term and long term as COVID began, and then I think stayed around longer than maybe we all anticipated in those early weeks. We supported community identified priorities through partnership and financial support. So one of the things that came out of this community listening tour and webinar space were really these specific needs that communities had. And then the question became, well, how do we respond to that? And how do we use partnership to work in communities and have funding supporting communities at the local space? And those of you who were part of our earlier webinars might have heard some from our Chatham community group and our Rockingham County group. We have a couple of slides today about that. We want to leverage resources. That's one thing we've been working on across 2020 and continue that work into 2021 and further into today's session. We'll ask you all to help us think about that and how we do this work effectively, and most importantly, in a way that makes sense for both community and campus perspectives. And we're thinking about how do we map these partnerships? How do we know who's doing what and where those partnerships are anchored? And how do we do that to inform one another of the work that's happening, and really to highlight opportunities for new partnerships or to strengthen existing partnerships across the state. We've been working on a newsletter. If you're not on that newsletter, please let us know that you'd like to subscribe. We share through social media. One of our main goals is to connect resources to our community partners. So often we'll see webinars come up or opportunities to apply for grants, or a community partner will share something happening in their home space. And we want to be able to share and highlight that to really connect communities who might be able to have some knowledge sharing across one another. So we're happy to connect you to our newsletter and our social media sites. Going the wrong way. So the rural response grants was one of the, COVID presented lots of challenges, but COVID also gave us some real opportunities to think about where was some space for innovation and how could innovation through partnership support the immediate needs of our communities. Two things we heard are two communities that really that came to us and applied for these grants. The rural response grant were really interested in supporting food insecurity needs across their County. I think food insecurity was one thing we heard over and over again, in addition to, broadband and other things. But the Chatham County and Rockingham County experiences, and this is a picture of the Rockingham County Mobile Food Market. Rockingham County is, if you go to Greensboro and kind of head north, for those of you who aren't not familiar with the Rockingham County area, they wanted to establish a mobile food market, but not only were they interested in providing food to families that were food insecure, they were also interested in learning who has access to the internet. I think we all saw how important technology access was for healthcare, for education, and they were curious, like, how can we learn where the disconnects are so we can find ways to support that piece too. And then they also worked on health assessments. So the grant funds expanded their mobile market to 2 underserved zip codes in Rockingham, and Merrill Holloway's on the call today. I saw him, one of very engaged in Rockingham County work. And as part of this grant, they aim to offer 8 mobile markets and do outreaches to populations with identified health needs. And these are just some of the pictures. The cool thing is, for me, was seeing the response of the community to come and be in this work with UNC, again, reflecting this idea of partnership and really engaged in authentic relationships. Here are just some of the outcomes. They served over 325 people, over 27,000 pounds of food. The program gave community and faith-based organizations a chance to see it in action. And the great part about that is they were able to sort of sustain this program after the grant ended. They connected new partners who came to share information. And then data from that project was used for additional grant opportunities. Again, thinking about the access for broadband and how important that was and how magnified it was where our spaces didn't have connectivity. They were able to use some of this data to support other grant opportunities in their own community. Chatham County Food Hub, the model was slightly different, but again, addressing food insecurity. So their goal was to design and implement a sustainable food hub, combining successful elements of models that have been otherwise done in North Carolina. Their real focus and one of their main focus were really using local vendors. They wanted to drive local economy, and they wanted to respond to food insecurity, providing free meals to those in need. Here are just a few of their outcomes. You can see they generated over almost $8,500 of revenue, paid wages to Chatham County residents. So these were residents who had been laid off due to COVID. So we were able to provide some financial funding to those people through their work with the food market. They provided 862 servings of food, emergency food boxes. Not only that, again, back to this health assessment piece and really connecting the dots across food insecurity, health outcomes, and all those spaces that we saw in COVID. They provided cloth face coverings. And then as you'll see below, it says intangibles. They doubled the social media following for a new farmer vendor. So again, the sustained impact after the grant, I think, is a really important thing and something we were excited to see build out of this partnership. And these are just some pictures, again, very community driven, local vendors. And so this is Chatham County. They worked with the community to identify a best spot. So again, this idea of authentic and engaged relationships to build something that was impactful and made sense in the community. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Giselle for the breakout room.
Thanks so much, Meredith. We wanted it for folks that were not able to participate in the run-up webinars. We wanted to give you all a sense of the kinds of activities because we want your help. We're going to give you 20 minutes in a breakout. 1, because we need your help, and then 2, because we've heard over and over again that one of the benefits of these webinars and also the Connect, Engage, Transform conference was the ability to talk with each other, to be in partnership with each other. So we want to make sure to use those breakouts in that way. There are going to be 8 breakouts. Each of you all will be invited to a breakout. When you accept it, you'll see a room number that tells you what the breakout is. Meredith, can you drop the Google Doc link so that everyone can click on it while they're here? Yep. Are you able to do that? Great.
I think I have to come out of the slide presentation, but give me 1 sec.
I can do it. I'll grab it right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Caroline.
And so the Google Doc link will be in the chat box. So go ahead and click on that so you have that open. Group 1 and 2 we're going to ask you to discuss a particular event that we're planning now across the university and really across the North Carolina. This is an engagement week. And so we're going to drop another link for you. So Caroline, I think you need, or somebody needs to make the Google Doc access available to everyone. Engagement Week is a 1-week program, and we'll put that link in the chat box for you also for groups 1 and 2 to look at. Last year, Engagement Week focused on the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it should be open. We're working on troubleshooting the Google Doc now. We'll drop in that Engagement Week website into the chat box for groups 1 and 2 to take a look at. And if we're going to do sort of an inaugural Engagement Week that focuses on rural communities, what would it include? What things should we be thinking about? How should we be engaging community, both at UNC and outside of UNC? Groups 3 and 4, you heard a little bit about the rural response grants that we had the great fortune of collaborating with the Carolina Center for Public Service. If we did a second round, what would that look like? And that's the question for groups 3 and 4. What should we focus on? It looks like the Google Doc is open now, so if folks need to click on that again, please go ahead and do so. And for groups 5 and 6, what are your thoughts for the focus of Connect, Engage, Transform, our CET conference? Planning with fingers crossed for 2022 that we'll be able to be in person. How should we focus that? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about in terms of themes, in terms of the way to focus that? And really even thinking about the platform, even if we are in person, does some of it need to be virtual? How should we be thinking about both the focus and the format for that? And then finally, for groups 7 and 8, Meredith talked a little bit about the mapping project. We want this project, this map of all of the community and academic partnerships that we are all participating across the state. We want it to be of maximum use to everyone. And so we want your ideas on the kinds of data, the kinds of things that need to be included in that mapping project so that it will be useful to you in the work that you're doing. Questions. And if folks have a question, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Go ahead and either raise your hand or drop a note into the chat box so that I can answer it. I can't tell if hands are raised, particularly if you're not on video.
Giselle, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, great.
All
right.
In the chat box.
Well, Dane is going to send folks out into your breakout groups. There should be about anywhere from 3 to 5 folks in a breakout group.
And please take the time to introduce yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to quickly debrief. If you might want to mute your phones. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And so we'd like to start by having you to share some of the feedback and the conversation that you had in your small groups. We ask you to take about 1 minute to share that with us. The first group, groups 1 and 2, were tasked with answering the questions: how should we be engaging community and those outside of UNC for an engagement week? And so group 1, would someone like to report out from that group what you heard? Don't be shy. Group 1.
I'll help out. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
So we were talking about how to engage the community and those outside of UNC for something like Engagement Week or just for work with the Rural Center in general. And most of us were kind of new to this organization and the work that you guys are doing and kind of here to learn more. But we talked about, could we engage more partners that are currently working with UNC in each county and kind of start with those existing community partners to build out those relationships and use those to connect with other people in the community because their networks are going to be larger than UNC's within those rural communities.
Okay.
Also making sure the content of that research week or those sessions are relevant for the rural partners and that it really connects to their missions because, we're all busy and have multiple conflicting things we're interested in attending, but making sure that it's connecting to their missions and interests will help connect more of those. We also talked about kind of surveying, mapping organizations, commonalities, identifying the needs and priorities for those rural counties.
Okay.
And then that took us down a road of, how do we define rural in this case?
All right.
And then having regular meetings that cross disciplines and kind of cross organizations and counties to connect those folks.
Thank you, Allison. Group 2, any thing that you didn't hear that you'd like to add?
We were just having a side conversation in the chat to see who would talk. So Eve, I know you were taking notes. I don't know if you want to add in a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Our group, Dr. Hardy was kind enough to share some of the kind of logistical, organizational communications, things that her community has been working through. And so our group kind of just discussed some strategies that the UNC departments and organizations might use for actual outreach into these communities. We talked about the importance of internet and just as far as even in like a church parking lot, being able to have that open so folks can get on the internet so we're able to have these channels for communication.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's great. I appreciate that. So groups 3 and 4 were asked the question, if we have another round of response grants that you heard described today, how should these be focused and what should round 2 look like? So group 3, what were your ideas and suggestions?
One thing that we talked about was just making sure that internet access becomes more sustainable in expanded rural communities. So right now there's a lot of programs that are trying to increase internet access during the pandemic, but we want to make sure that those are like internet connection is improved in the long run for rural communities. And then also, I think one thing that we talked about, but I didn't actually write down here, was just the importance of whether it's expanded, whether it's able to be expanded or not, just having wages for people like involved in projects, I think really made a big difference, especially because so many people in rural communities have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And then let's see, increasing outreach efforts with other groups that have similar interests in rural communities, I think is really it's a really good use of resources for UNC Rural, as well as other organizations that are in the rural communities that you're trying to reach out to.
Thank you. Group 4, anything new that you didn't hear regarding the projects, the funding?
I can speak on behalf of Group 4. We were all or are all undergraduate students with UNC, and this is the first time we've actually heard of UNC Rural and the various program initiatives. So in reference to the second wave of response grants, I feel like that was not our area of expertise per se, but I think the one thing we touched on moving forward with like COVID and like distributing the vaccines is still being cognizant that there's some suspicion in a way surrounding the vaccine. And I'm not sure entirely what that looks like with using like funding for grants, but just working towards like a streamlined implementation of that.
Mm. Thanks, Christina. Group 5, you were tasked with answering the question, what thoughts do you have for the focus for the Connect, Engage, Transform conference for 2022? Any thoughts there? Any ideas and suggestions? Group 5?
I'll step in. We had a small group, and I'm Tricia Daisley, and I actually work for the Center for Public Service, and Angela and Abby are undergrads. And this is actually their first involvement with CET. It also, again, sort of not the they don't have a wide frame of reference, but I think that everybody agreed that on some level to retain some aspect of a virtual component, whether it's recording the session. And as I shared with them, I believe last year, the only aspect that was shared last year was the keynote address, but that the ability to have it virtually does allow for people with internet access, people from throughout the state to participate. The other focus items were uncertainty in and of itself, that while we had the CET conference last year at the beginning of January, before COVID was really a twinkle in anybody's eye, it quickly became a focus, and that perhaps a focus for future conferences, whether or not they're virtual or in person or some hybrid thereof, to address the fact that the uncertainty in some aspect is going to remain, and how do we prepare individually and collectively for the populations and the organizations and the populations that we might represent to deal with that and pivot really drastically in some cases. And then another is to focus more on underserved populations and their access to healthcare. And one suggestion we also came up with for a webinar format for the CET conferences is to perhaps have fewer breakout groups to increase the odds of the fact that folks in the breakout rooms might come from more diverse populations outside of Chapel Hill, outside of any certain type of community partner, and create a little bit more diverse and robust conversation.
Thanks, Tricia. Anyone else? Group 6?
I'll just share a couple things. We were just more focused a little bit. My name's Merrill Holloway. We just talked a little bit about like particular topics, and like the big theme was just like innovation. Not really too much more about format, but the topics that came up were innovative things that folks are doing in schools, particularly ways that parents were getting involved, particularly with education, authentic relationships, media literacy, how to discern authentic information, vaccine information, data science came up. Thought it might be really interesting, like with things or people doing in different communities, data journalism, interesting things that were happening with infrastructure, water, electricity, broadband, quantitative approaches that folks were taking, solutions, statistics, things that were people, ideas are being brought to municipalities in different communities, urban to rural solutions. So just innovation was the big thing.
Thank you. That was great. So group 7 and 8, I want to move you forward in answering the question, what type of data would be helpful for us to include in a mapping project of community academic rural partnerships? What do we need? What's missing? What are the gaps? Group 7.
You want me to talk?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I took the notes, so I don't want to take it. Meredith, do you want to talk?
This screen is so weird. I'm trying to find the voices, right?
Yeah. I'm Caroline. So, okay, we had Meredith in our group, which was helpful to get some context on this question. But in terms of, we discussed just kind of how, like, first of all, how complicated that question is of figuring out what type of data would be helpful in a mapping project and setting the boundaries or limits for something like that. Meredith introduced the idea of an internal lens and an external lens. So thinking about what's helpful for people at UNC to know about what's going on in rural North Carolina, and then what's helpful for rural community members to know about like what UNC is doing in rural North Carolina. And so some of the things we brainstormed were having in terms of what is helpful for UNC people to know, recognizing that there's no monolithic rural North Carolina, that each community is going to be unique and have its own unique needs and assets and that kind of thing. The importance of relationships, knowing who are the community leaders, and having sort of cultural humility going into a new place. And then some other things we talked about were what's the nature of a partnership, whether it's students who are doing service learning experiences, or professors or faculty members doing research, medical people doing rotations, that sort of thing. The type of engagement, it could be a financial-based partnership. The length of partnership matters. So we went over a lot of different topics. Those are just some of the examples.
Yeah. And our last group 8, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, we found that a couple of projects within UNC are conducting community needs assessments, which we think is part of the process for the mapping exercise. But we wanted to start with, what does a comprehensive map mean? That it's more than just programmatic, that it should be community centered rather than programmatically centered. That there are also resources that are needed to really do a proper mapping exercise that exists outside of some of our funding. For example, my group's funding is very much restricted. It's a federal funding, and so we're only able to do certain things. And how can we use restricted funding while we're also addressing the broader needs of the communities that we're working in and that we're trying to serve? Yeah, that was one of the big things.
That was great. Thank you, Tiki. So I'll turn it back over to Giselle and Meredith.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much for your engagement, and we will definitely, you'll be seeing these ideas in the future, believe me. This was incredibly helpful. We want this work to serve you and your colleagues, and so you'll see this going forward. Meredith, do you have the slides, or are they up already? I have too many things open. Thank you.
They're coming up now.
Great. So a second round of breakouts. I don't know if we can have a smaller number. I think that might be a little too much for us to ask Dane to do in this moment. Have you already done it, Dane? Awesome. So see, already implementing your suggestions, a smaller number of breakout groups. And we're going to ask you, we only have 15 minutes, so you'll be in a different set of breakouts. Please introduce yourselves to each other. Again, this is an opportunity for you to get to know other folks. We want to ask you, you've heard and worked on some of the sort of elements of what we're hoping to do in this coming year. What other programs should we be thinking about? What other activities should we be pursuing? What are we missing? And we're going to use the same Google Doc. If somebody could drop that link back into the chat for folks, and you all were able to find at the bottom of the Google Doc your group number. Remember, when you accept that, you have to accept the invite, and you'll see what group number you're in, and then go ahead and click on that link on the bottom of the Google Doc so that you can record your responses. And you'll have only 15 minutes. It's going to go quickly because you're going to have more people in your groups. So let's see how it works. Thanks, Dane.
All right. Hey, thanks. I think this is everyone. We had some to drop off, but we have a few minutes left. What I'd like to do is to start in reverse order by actually having group 4 to go first and to actually kind of share with us what you heard in terms of the program areas that UNC Rural should pursue in 2021. Group 4, any suggestions or thoughts around programming?
Does anybody from Group 4 want to talk? Christina, Veronica, Mark? No. All right, I'll share out really quickly. I was in Group 4 and we had some great conversation. I think one thing we heard was more frequent convenings, but frequent convenings with intention. So whether those are regionally based or topically based or both and, that those convenings are moving us to action. There was some conversation about it's easy to connect based on your lane. But when you get outside of that lane, it's much harder to figure out how to make connections on a campus like UNC, unless you already have that relationship. So again, this idea of like how we know what the left and right hand need to be able to connect to this mapping idea so we can all be better informed would be helpful. Connecting with other speaker series that are happening on campus. So from the undergraduate lens, a lot of undergraduate students don't know about UNC Rural, and said there was lots of space through which we might be able to connect in those courses to share about what we're doing, or connect to other speaker series, or invite speakers that we know in the community into classes and really bridge the connection in that way too.
Thank you. Group 3.
Can speak for Group 3. I took some notes, but feel free to jump in, other Group 3 members, if I missed something. But our conversation ended up really focusing on kind of the matchmaking role that UNC Rural can play between students and communities. Our group was actually really nicely comprised of a handful of students and a handful of community members, and then I'm based out of NC Growth at the Keenan Institute. But we talked really somewhat about themes that are important in communities. Environmental justice came up as kind of a cross-cutting theme, and how that could be leveraged since North Carolina is the birthplace of this movement. And recently with the Biden's appointment of Mr. Regan to, that could be kind of leveraged as an opportunity for the state. But yeah, really came to this kind of, how do you connect between students, communities, researchers on campus, programs that are happening, and then of course, is there funding that can be provided to support students working with communities? And then another piece of that is identifying the students who are on campus who come from these communities and actually pairing them back to their home communities. So Dr. Hardy mentioned how she would love to connect with students from Franklin County to actually work in Franklin County. So that was a very exciting conversation, I thought.
Thank you. Group 2, the matchmaking is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Group 2. Mackenzie? No?
Yeah, Pierre, I think that was us.
Okay. Just making sure I forgot the number. I think one thing that we really focused on, which is something that someone had brought up before, but just about making sure that people have access to dependable internet that's also affordable and long-term. That's given the reliance that we have had on the internet, like really before COVID, but like COVID has made clear just how reliant we are on the internet. And since rural communities don't have access to, well, in some cases have no access to internet, in some cases have access to internet that's not really good internet, just having like a program that focused specifically on expanding internet access, I think would make a really big difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you. And finally, Group 1.
Hi, yeah, I'm talking on behalf of Group 1. So we talked about similar things to what everybody just talked about. I believe it was Corey that said we should it would be helpful to work with organizations like Carolina Next Council for Public Good and working with Innovate Carolina. That way more students could engage with rural communities. And then we also said, we also asked if UNC Rural could help students be more intentional about doing this in a way that prioritizes the community's needs. And yeah, we talked about greater publicity with of UNC Rural with undergraduate population, and then similar to group 2, I think that was before us, we talked about internet as well. We would like to have more thoughts and ideas around broadband, figuring out how institutions and policies can be more helpful, and putting pressure on internet service providers and governments, and building out. Yeah, this is if anyone from my group wants to talk more about this, I am just reading our notes, but I think it was Meryl who talked about like the internet and broadband, and how we need to have more discussion around like real digital inclusion plans, and internet. Yeah.
You did great, Kayla, and Meryl had to step away. And I just wanted to say that the notes from this group were on group 8. So if you need to find those, Meredith or Giselle, for some reason I typed them on the group 8 sheet.
Thank you. So thank you for your feedback, and thank you for your participation. I'll turn it over to Giselle and Meredith for closing out.
All right. Well, Giselle and I were just having this conversation. I will speak, but then I actually would love for Giselle to wrap us up too. I just wanted to say thank you guys. I know the groups I was in felt like some really wonderful feedback, and I'm excited to think about how this feedback will inform the work moving forward. Appreciate your time. And for the undergrad students who are in this space, if you'd like to connect, we'd love to find ways to stay engaged with you and figure out how we can raise awareness around this initiative to really support student engagement as well. So I just wanted to say thank you. I'll turn it over to Giselle for final thoughts.
Great. Meredith, do you want to drop your email into the chat for students that are on, particularly given the request for making those kinds of connections? That way folks can email you directly. I just want to thank you. This has been such an incredibly robust and really wonderful conversation. Thank you all for being here. I know that we are looking at early March. We haven't settled yet on the date for our final session in this webinar series. So we will be sending out that information, and we look forward to seeing you all at the last session. And thank you all. Thank you again, Al, so much for your expert moderation of this group. And as always, we want to thank our partners, the Carolina Center for Public Service in this work. And with that, I'm going to close, give you all back another 4 minutes to your day. Thank you.